Galactic Council orders truce. Humanity chooses retaliation. Part 1. The burning of Earth's colonies. The message came at 3:47 hours, Earth Standard Time. Admiral Park was sleeping in his quarters aboard the flagship when the emergency alarm pulled him from his dreams. He had been dreaming of his sister's garden the flowers she grew there, the way her children laughed when they played in the morning sun. He would never see that garden again. The communication officer's voice shook as she delivered the report. 3 human colony worlds had been attacked without warning. Prime, Station. The Dominion had come with a fleet of over 2,000 warships. They had not come to conquer, they had come to kill. Dressed quickly and walked to the command bridge. His officers stood in silence, watching the screens. The images coming from the colonies were difficult to understand at first. Where cities had stood, there was now only glass. They had used plasma bombardment, the kind that turned stone and metal and flesh into vapor. They had targeted civilian centers first. Schools, hospitals, markets filled with families. 800 million people, dead in less than 1 solar week. Gripped the railing of the command platform. His knuckles turned white. Somewhere in that glass wasteland was his sister, her husband, their 2 daughters, ages 7 and 4. He had promised to visit them next month for the youngest one's birthday. "Admiral," the communications officer said softly, "we are receiving no life signs from any of the 3 worlds." He nodded once. He did not trust his voice. And its escort fleet had been on patrol near the outer systems when the attack happened. They were 3 days away at maximum speed. By the time they arrived, there was nothing left to save. Ordered his ships into orbit around and looked down at the planet where he had grown up. The blue oceans were still there. The green forests remained. But every city, every town, every place where humans had lived and loved and built their lives was now a crater of melted earth. Lieutenant Commander came to stand beside him. She was young, barely 30, but she had the sharpest mind in the fleet. Her specialty was tactical analysis, but today she carried a different kind of report. "Admiral," she said, "I have completed my analysis of the weapon signatures." Turned to face her, and the used Cascade plasma warheads. They are banned under the Galactic Compact. Article 7, Section 12. These weapons are designed specifically to maximize civilian casualties. She paused. This was not an act of war, Admiral. This was extermination. The word hung in the air between them. Looked back at the ruined world below. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 50 years ago. They had been careful, polite. They had followed every rule, signed every treaty, and stayed neutral in every conflict between the older species. The Galactic Council had welcomed them as a young and promising civilization. And now 800 million of them were dead. On Earth, the news spread like fire. Defense Minister Sora stood before the United Nations General Assembly. The Great Hall was silent. Every seat was filled. Leaders from every nation watched as she walked to the podium. Her face showed no tears. Her voice did not shake. But those who knew her could see the cold fury burning behind her eyes. 3 days ago, she began, the Dominion attacked our people without warning and without cause. They did not declare war. They did not make demands. They simply came and murdered 800 million human beings. She let the number sit in the silence. We have been members of the galactic community for 50 years. In that time, we have never attacked another species. We have never threatened another world. We have been peaceful, cooperative, and patient. Her voice hardened. We have been everything the galaxy asked us to be, and in return, we received fire and death. The assembly erupted in shouts and cries, but Sora raised her hand for silence. The Galactic Council has sent us a message expressing their concern. They have promised to investigate. They have asked us to remain calm. She paused. Calm. They ask us to be calm while our children's ashes drift in the wind of dead worlds. She leaned forward on the podium. I stand before you today not to ask for calm. I stand here to tell you that Earth has made a decision. We will not wait for the Council to investigate. We will not trust alien bureaucrats to deliver justice for our dead. We will answer this crime ourselves." The assembly rose to its feet. The applause was not joyful. It was dark and terrible and filled with grief. Across human space, the shipyards received new orders. Factories that made farming equipment began making weapons. Scientists who studied medicine began studying ways to kill. Young men and women who had never thought about war lined up at recruitment centers by the millions. Admiral received his orders directly from Earth Command. He was to gather every available warship and prepare for offensive operations. The rules of engagement were simple. They had shown no mercy to humanity. Humanity would show no mercy in return. On the bridge of the held a small photograph. It showed his sister and her daughters smiling in their garden lawn. The flowers were bright. The sun was warm. The children held hands and laughed at something outside the frame. He placed the photograph in his pocket, close to his heart. "Set course for space," he ordered. "All ships, maximum speed." The fleet turned as one and accelerated toward the stars. Behind them, the ruined colonies drifted in silence. Ahead, an empire that had never known defeat waited in ignorance. They did not know what was coming. They had never faced an enemy like humanity. They had never understood that the small, young species they had tried to exterminate was not weak. It was simply waiting. That wait was over. Humanity was coming, and it was bringing war. Galactic Council orders truce. Humanity chooses retaliation. Part 2. The Council's verdict. 6 months had passed since the burning of Earth's colonies. In that time, the galaxy had watched in growing fear as humanity showed the universe what it truly was. The Dominion had ruled their sector of space for 3,000 years. They had conquered dozens of species. Their fleet was the largest in known space, and their warriors believed themselves unbeatable. They had expected humanity to weep and beg for peace. Instead, humanity came for blood. Admiral Park led the main fleet directly into territory. The first battle happened at a military station called. The commander laughed when he saw the human ships. They were small. They were few. They were clearly the desperate attack of a dying species. The laughter stopped when the first wave of human missiles tore through his flagship. Humanity had spent 50 years watching the galaxy, learning, studying. They had mapped weaknesses that they themselves did not know existed. Human ships were smaller, yes, but they were faster and harder to hit. Human weapons were not as powerful, but they were more accurate. And human soldiers fought with a fury that they had never seen before. Fell in 3 hours, every ship was destroyed. The station was captured intact. Over the next 6 months, humanity pushed deeper and deeper into space. 12 military stations fell. 40 warships were destroyed. The Grand Fleet, which had never lost a major battle, lost 4 in a row. Panic began to spread through the Dominion. This was not supposed to happen. Humanity was supposed to be weak. In the great chamber of the Galactic Council, the 12 elder species watched the war with growing alarm. The Council had maintained peace among the stars for 10,000 years. They had rules. They had traditions. They had a system that kept civilizations from destroying each other. And now a young species, barely a century into space travel, was tearing that system apart. The Council speaker was an ancient being from the collective. They were the oldest species still active in galactic affairs. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had guided countless civilizations toward peace. When the speaker rose to address the chamber, every representative fell silent. The war between the Dominion and the human civilization must end, the speaker declared. The Council hereby orders an immediate ceasefire. All military operations must stop. All fleets must return to their home territories. This is the will of the Council. The representative accepted instantly. His species was losing badly. A ceasefire would give them time to rebuild, to recover, to prepare for the next phase of the war. He could barely hide his relief. The human representative was Ambassador Jinnah. She was a small woman with gray in her hair and steel in her eyes. She had been a diplomat for 30 years. She had negotiated trade deals and cultural exchanges and boring administrative agreements. She had never expected to speak for humanity in a matter of war. She stood slowly and looked around the chamber. The alien faces looked back at her with a mixture of concern and condescension. They expected her to obey. Every species in the history of the Council had obeyed. Humanity was young and small and surely understood its place in the galaxy. "I have heard the Council's verdict," Jinnah said. Her voice was calm. "I have a question before I respond." The speaker nodded. "Ask." 6 months ago, they murdered 800 million of our people. They used weapons banned by your own laws. They targeted civilians. They killed children. She paused. Where was the Council then? The chamber was silent. "We sent emergency messages to every member of this Council. We begged for help. We asked for intervention. We received expressions of concern. We received promises to investigate." Her voice grew colder. "We received nothing that mattered." The speaker shifted uncomfortably. "The Council does not interfere in conflicts between member species. This is our tradition." "Your tradition," Jinnah repeated. "Your tradition is to watch while innocents burn and then demand peace when the survivors fight back." She shook her head slowly. "The leadership remains in power. Their military is damaged but not destroyed. If we accept this ceasefire, they will rebuild. They will wait. And then, in a decade or a century, they will come to finish what they started." "The Council will monitor," the speaker began. "The Council monitored nothing while our colonies burned." Jinnah's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "You watched 800 million people die and said nothing. Now that we are winning, you suddenly find your voice. You suddenly care about peace." She stepped forward, her small figure somehow filling the massive chamber. "I am authorized to deliver the official response of the United Earth government. We reject your ceasefire. We reject your authority to impose one. The Council's jurisdiction ends where our dead begin." The chamber exploded in chaos. Representatives shouted in a dozen different languages. The speaker called for order, but no one listened. For the first time in 10,000 years, a species had openly the Galactic Council. On Earth, President addressed the human population directly. His face appeared on every screen, in every home, on every ship and station across human space. "The galaxy has asked us to stop fighting," he said. "They have asked us to accept a peace that rewards the murderers of our children. They have asked us to trust the same council that did nothing while our worlds burned." He paused and looked directly into the camera. "I have asked the people of Earth to vote on this matter. The result is clear. 94% of humanity has chosen to continue the war. We will not stop until they can never threaten us again. We will not stop until justice is done." The Galactic Council responded with threats. They spoke of sanctions, of isolation, of cutting humanity off from galactic trade and technology. They even suggested that the elder species might unite their fleets to force humanity into compliance. Defense Minister Sara answered those threats with a simple statement. "Any ship that interferes with our military operations will be treated as an enemy vessel. We do not care what flag it flies." The galaxy had never seen anything like this. Species had gone to war before, yes, but they had always accepted council authority in the end. They had always bowed to the elder species. They had always remembered their place. Humanity remembered nothing except the ashes of 800 million dead, and humanity would not bow. Admiral received the news aboard the. He read the council's demands and then deleted the message without response. He had more important matters to consider. His fleet was 3 weeks from the home system. The war was not over, it was just beginning. Galactic Council orders truce. Humanity chooses retaliation. Part 3. The Doctrine of Total Response. The war room aboard the flagship was quiet. Admiral Park stood before a holographic map of space. His senior officers sat in a half-circle around him, waiting. They had won every battle so far. They had destroyed dozens of enemy ships and captured key positions throughout territory, but knew that winning battles was not the same as winning wars. They still believe they can outlast us, he said. Their leaders are telling their people that humanity will grow tired, that we will accept peace eventually, that all they need to do is wait. He touched the holographic map, and it zoomed in on a cluster of worlds near the core systems. We need to show them that waiting is not an option. We need to make them understand that this war ends only one way. Captain Lee shifted in his seat. He was one of the most decorated officers in the fleet, a hero of 3 major battles, but his face showed concern. Admiral, what exactly are you proposing? Turned to face his officers directly. I am proposing the doctrine of absolute reciprocity. They burned 3 of our worlds. They killed 800 million civilians. They made no distinction between soldiers and children. He paused. We will respond in kind. The room went very still. You are talking about attacking civilian targets, said slowly. I am talking about showing them exactly what they did to us. I am talking about making them feel what we felt. I am talking about breaking their will to fight. Stood up, his voice was respectful but firm. Admiral, I understand your pain. I lost friends on good people. But if we become what they are, then they have already won. We cannot murder civilians and call it justice. His eyes were hard. The council called our dead civilians. They called the attack a tragedy, but they did nothing. Now they expect us to fight with clean hands while our enemy bathes in blood. He shook his head. I will not send our soldiers to die while the homeland remains safe and comfortable. The argument continued for an hour, and several other officers spoke against attacking civilians. They argued that humanity was better than this, that there had to be limits, that becoming monsters to defeat monsters would destroy everything humanity stood for. But others agreed with. They had seen the glass craters they had lost families. They wanted to know true fear. In the end, made the decision himself. The doctrine of absolute reciprocity would become official policy. But he added one condition, pushed by, military and industrial targets would be prioritized. Pure civilian centers would be hit only if necessary. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely. Dr. Han was the fleet's. Her job was to understand alien minds, to find the weaknesses that weapons could not touch. She had studied them for years, and now she brought her analysis to the command staff. They have never faced a genuine threat, she explained. For 3,000 years, they have been the strongest species in their region of space. They conquer others. They are never conquered. Their entire culture is built on the belief that they are natural rulers. She showed images of cities on her display. Tall, beautiful buildings, orderly streets, citizens who had never known the fear of invasion. Their civilian population has been told that humans are prey animals, weak creatures who kill easily. They believe this war is almost over, that we will surrender soon, and that their lives will continue unchanged. She looked at the officers. If we show them they are wrong, if we bring the war to their homes, their society will crack. They are not prepared for this. They do not know how to be afraid. The Galactic Council made its move 3 days later. A diplomatic fleet of 15 ships from 5 elder species arrived at the edge of human territory. They carried a formal ultimatum: accept the ceasefire or face collective action from the entire council. Defense Minister Sara received the ultimatum on Earth. She read it carefully, then called an emergency meeting with President and the military commanders. They are not bluffing, she said. The elder species have not united their fleets in 2,000 years, but they are genuinely afraid of what we might become. President nodded slowly. What do you recommend? Sora did not hesitate. We call their bluff. Any ship that enters our space or attempts to block our operations will be treated as hostile. We do not fire first, but we do not back down. The orders went out across human space. Every human warship received the same message. Hold your position, do not retreat, do not surrender. Captain Shin commanded the destroyer. It was a small ship, barely armed enough to threaten a cargo vessel. But when the Council's diplomatic fleet arrived at the border, the move to block their path. The flagship transmitted a direct message. Human vessel, you are ordered to stand down. The Council fleet will pass. This is not a request. Stood on his bridge, surrounded by officers who knew they were 100 to 1. He looked at the massive alien ships filling his. Then he opened a response channel. This is Captain Shin of the United Earth Defense Fleet. I have received your order, I reject it. He paused. You may pass through us. You will not pass around us. If you wish to enter human space, you will have to kill me and my crew first. The channel went silent. The Council fleet held its position. Minutes passed, then hours. On the flagship, the commander faced a choice he had never imagined. His species had not fired a weapon in anger for centuries. They had forgotten what it meant to kill. And now, a single human destroyer, crewed by barely 200 people, was daring him to start a war. He thought about the reports from the front. Human ships charging directly at enemy formations. Human soldiers fighting to the last breath. Human civilians lining up to volunteer even knowing they might die. These were not reasonable people. These were not creatures who understood their place in the galaxy. These were something else entirely. The commander ordered his fleet to withdraw. Across human space, the news spread instantly. One small ship had faced down the combined might of the elder species and won, not through firepower but through sheer refusal to bend. Admiral received the report aboard the. He allowed himself a small smile, the first in months. Captain Shin's crew is to receive commendations, he ordered, every single one of them. Then he turned back to the map showing Prime, the of the enemy, the place where the order to burn human colonies had been given. Prepare the fleet for the final offensive, he commanded. We end this. The ships of humanity turned toward the core systems. Behind them, the elder species watched in silence. They had tried to stop this. They had failed. Whatever happened next, the galaxy would never be the same. Galactic Council orders truce. Humanity chooses retaliation. Part 4: The Fall of Prime. 300 human warships dropped out of hyperspace above Prime. The planet hung in the darkness like a blue and green jewel, beautiful and unsuspecting. Its orbital defenses were impressive, hundreds of weapon platforms and defense stations circling the world like a shell of steel. The Grand Fleet, rebuilt after months of desperate effort, waited in formation to protect there. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of the and studied the enemy positions. They had twice as many ships. They had larger weapons. They had the advantage of defending their home territory. By every traditional calculation, humanity should lose this battle. But had not come this far to fight a traditional battle. All ships, he ordered, execute attack pattern avalanche. No retreats, no pauses, straight through the middle. The human fleet surged forward as one. The commanders watched in disbelief. Standard military doctrine said that an attacking force should probe for weaknesses, find gaps in the defense, exploit them carefully. No sane commander would charge directly into the teeth of a superior force. But humanity had stopped being sane the day their colonies burned. The first wave of missiles launched before the fleets were even in main weapons range. Human ships fired everything they had in a massive opening barrage. The defense stations tracked the incoming weapons and prepared to destroy them. Then the missiles did something unexpected. They split apart, each warhead dividing into dozens of smaller projectiles that scattered in random patterns. The targeting systems, designed for traditional combat, could not track them all. Explosions began rippling across the defense line. Lieutenant Commander coordinated the attack from her tactical station. She had spent months studying battle recordings, finding the tiny flaws in their systems that they themselves did not see. Now she guided each wave of attacks to exploit those flaws precisely. Strike Group Alpha target the command station at coordinates 773. Strike Group Beta hit the fuel depots at the eastern orbital ring. Her voice was calm, almost mechanical. Strike Group Gamma, you have 12 seconds before the window closes. Fire now. They fought back hard. Their weapons were powerful and they scored hits against the smaller human ships. A dozen human vessels were destroyed in the first hour of battle, but for every human ship that died, 3 ships went with it. They had never learned how to fight an enemy that did not care about dying. Human captains deliberately rammed damaged ships into enemy formations. Human pilots flew suicide missions to take out key targets. Human soldiers fought with a fury that terrified the who had always believed war was a game played by rules. This was not a game, this was revenge. The Battle of Prime lasted 11 hours. By the end, the orbital defenses were shattered. The Grand Fleet was destroyed. The planet below lay open and unprotected, waiting for whatever humanity chose to do. Admiral ordered the invasion to begin. Dropships fell through the atmosphere like burning rain. Human soldiers, wearing heavy combat armor, landed in the capital city while civilians fled in panic. They had been told humans were weak. They had been promised that the war would never reach their world. Now armored figures marched through their streets, and the sounds of battle echoed between the tall buildings. Landed with the first wave. He wanted to see them with his own eyes. He wanted to walk on the ground where the orders to kill his sister had been given. The High Commander was named Lord. He was a massive creature, nearly 3 meters tall, with scales like armor and teeth like knives. He had commanded the attack on human colonies. He had personally chosen which worlds to burn. Now he stood in the ruins of his command center and watched human soldiers surround him. I demand single combat, snarled. It is our ancient tradition, one warrior against one warrior. The winner determines the fate of both peoples. Looked at the alien who had murdered his family. He felt the weight of the photograph still in his pocket, pressing against his chest. You bombed nurseries, said quietly. You killed children in their beds. You burned entire worlds without warning or mercy. He shook his head. There is no honor here for your traditions to satisfy. You will surrender unconditionally, or you will die where you stand. Roared and charged, drawing a blade from his belt. He was fast for his size, incredibly fast, but had trained for this moment. He the attack and fired a single shot from his sidearm. The energy bolt struck in the knee, and the massive alien crashed to the ground. Human soldiers moved in and placed restraints on the fallen commander. Screamed curses in his language, promising vengeance, promising that they would rise again and finish what they started. Ignored him. There were more important matters to handle. Led the intelligence team that raided the government archives. The data centers were buried deep underground, protected by heavy security. But human hackers had spent months preparing for this moment. They broke through the defenses in hours. What they found changed everything. The archives contained records going back 3,000 years, detailed records of conquests and victories, and buried within those records was a terrible truth. Humanity was not the first species that had tried to exterminate. 17 civilizations, 17 species that had once lived among the stars. Some had been young like humanity, others had been ancient and wise. All of them had been destroyed by the systematically murdered and erased from history. Their planets were still there, but their people were gone forever. And after each genocide, the Galactic Council had intervened. They had ordered truces. They had demanded peace. They had allowed them to rebuild and recover. And then, decades or centuries later, the had struck again. Brought this information directly to Admiral. He read the reports in silence, his face growing harder with each page. Broadcast this to every species in the galaxy, he ordered. Every world, every station, every ship, everyone needs to see what the Council protected. The transmission went out within hours. Across 1,000 worlds, alien species watched the evidence of 17 forgotten genocides. They learned the names of species that no longer existed. They saw images of worlds that were now empty graves. The Galactic Council had not maintained peace for 10,000 years. They had maintained a comfortable silence while one species murdered others again and again. Captain Lee commanded the occupation forces in the capital. He faced a difficult decision when civilians began surrendering by the thousands. The doctrine of absolute reciprocity called for retaliation in kind. They had shown no mercy to human civilians, but looked at the frightened faces before him, workers and shopkeepers and parents holding their children, and he could not give the order to kill them. Establish protected zones, he commanded. Any civilian who surrenders peacefully will be treated according to the laws of war. No executions without trial. When his superiors questioned his decision, stood firm. We prove we are better than them by knowing when to stop. If we murder their children because they murdered ours, then we become exactly what we are fighting. The debate would continue for years. But in that moment on the streets of the fallen capital, one man chose mercy. The government surrendered unconditionally 3 days later. Their empire, which had terrorized the galaxy for 3,000 years, was finished. But humanity was not done. The war was over. Now came the harder task, making sure it could never happen again. Galactic Council orders truce. Humanity chooses retaliation. Part 5. Judgment at the Galactic Council. The great chamber of the Galactic Council had stood for 10,000 years. Its walls had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Its floors had been walked by creatures from every corner of the galaxy. For it had been a place of quiet diplomacy and gentle compromise. Today, it would become something else entirely. Ambassador Jinnah walked to the central platform. She was older than she had been a year ago. The war had added lines to her face and gray to her hair, but her eyes burned with a fire that made the assembled representatives uncomfortable. "I come before this council not to ask for anything," she began. "I come to show you what you have done." The holographic displays around the chamber flickered to life. Images appeared, photographs, videos, official documents, all taken from the archives. The representatives watched in growing horror as the evidence unfolded. 17 species, names that had been forgotten for centuries. A peaceful civilization of artists and philosophers, who had developed technologies far beyond their neighbors. A young species just beginning to explore the stars, all of them gone, all of them murdered by And after each genocide, the records showed, the Galactic Council had intervened. "Ceasefire ordered," Jinnah read from one document. "Dominion to withdraw to pre-war borders. Territories to be designated as neutral zone. Matter considered resolved." She looked up at the council representatives. Resolved. The complete extermination of an entire species was considered resolved. And 30 years later they attacked again. And again the council ordered a ceasefire. And again they rebuilt and returned. The speaker rose slowly. His ancient face showed an emotion that few had ever seen there: shame. "We believed," he said quietly, "that peace was always better than war. That dialogue could solve any problem. That given enough time, even the most violent species would learn to live in harmony with others." "You believed wrong," Jinnah said flatly. "Your peace cost 17 species their existence. Your dialogue protected murderers while their victims screamed. Your harmony was built on the graves of billions." The chamber erupted in argument. Some species shouted in agreement with Jinnah. Others defended the council's traditions. The elder species tried to maintain order, but their authority had been shattered by the evidence on display. Humanity was not just demanding recognition. Humanity was demanding change. President addressed the council via holographic transmission. His image appeared at the center of the chamber, larger than life, commanding attention from every representative. "I know what you think of us," he said. "You think we are young, violent, uncivilized. You think we do not understand the complexities of galactic politics." He paused. "Perhaps you are right, but we understand something you have forgotten. Some crimes cannot be forgiven without accountability." He outlined humanity's proposal. They called it the doctrine of consequence. Any species that committed atrocities would face mandatory tribunals. Leaders would be judged and, if found guilty, punished. Reparations would be paid to victims. Monitoring systems would be established to prevent future attacks. No more truces that protected aggressors. No more peace without justice. "You ask us to trust the same system that failed 17 times before," continued. "We will not. Either the galaxy changes or humanity will enforce change ourselves. Those are the only options." The debate that followed lasted for days. Species that had lived in fear of stronger neighbors, afraid of becoming the 18th victim of predators like the to humanity's side. They saw in the doctrine of consequence a promise that the galaxy would finally protect the weak instead of tolerating the strong. But others resisted. The elder species had maintained their position through careful neutrality. They had survived by never taking sides, by always seeking compromise. The idea of actively punishing a species for its crimes went against everything they believed. Dr. Han worked with alien scholars from a dozen different worlds to draft the new galactic compact. They spent weeks arguing over every word, every clause, every possible interpretation. The goal was to create a system that would prevent future genocides without becoming a tool for oppression. "The problem with power," explained to her colleagues, "is that it can be misused. If we give the Council the authority to punish species, that authority might one day be turned against the innocent. We must build in protections." The final document was over 2,000 pages long. It established clear definitions of crimes against civilization. It created an independent tribunal system staffed by representatives from multiple species. It required evidence beyond reasonable doubt before any action could be taken, and it gave every accused species the right to defend itself. It was not perfect. Nothing designed by flawed beings ever was, but it was better than what had come before. Captain Lee, now promoted to admiral, took command of the coalition fleet that would enforce the new compact. Ships from humanity and a dozen allied species patrolled the borders of former territory, ensuring that the occupation proceeded peacefully and that no revenge attacks occurred in either direction. He spent long nights reading reports from the ground. The transition was not easy. Some accepted the new reality and began working toward rebuilding their society. Others harbored resentment that would last for generations. The scars of war did not heal quickly. But there was no more killing. The fighting had stopped, and slowly, carefully, something like normal life began to return. Admiral Park stepped down from active command. He had led humanity through its darkest hour, but he could not lead it into peace. The skills needed for war were different from the skills needed for healing. He understood this about himself. On his last day in uniform, he traveled too. The planet was still recovering. Teams of engineers were removing the glass craters and preparing the ground for new construction. Memorials were being built to honor the dead. Life was slowly returning. Walked to the place where his sister's house had once stood. There was nothing left, not even ruins. Just smooth, glassy ground where 800 million lives had ended. He stood there for a long time, alone with his memories. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. I kept my promise. I did not let them get away with it. He paused. I hope it was worth it. I hope I did right. There was no answer. There would never be an answer. The dead could not tell the living whether their sacrifices made sense. But as walked away from that empty place, he saw something that made him stop. A group of workers had gathered nearby. They were planting trees, small seedlings that would take decades to grow into something beautiful. One of the workers was a young woman who reminded him of his niece. She looked up, saw his uniform, and smiled. "Thank you," she said simply, nodded and kept walking. Behind him, the workers continued planting. Roots went into the soil where glass had been. Life pushed up toward the sky. Back on Earth, Defense Minister Sora won the presidential election by the largest margin in human history. Her inauguration speech acknowledged the cost of what humanity had done. "We have blood on our hands," she said. "We made choices that we will argue about for centuries. We became something harder and darker than we were before." She paused. "But we are still here. Our children are still here. And the galaxy knows that humanity will not accept cruelty without consequence." The crowd was silent. We did not ask for this war. We did not want to become warriors. But when the universe told us to accept our dead and be quiet, we chose to fight. That choice has changed us forever. She looked out at the millions watching. Let us make sure it changed us into something better. The applause that followed was not celebration. It was something quieter and more solemn, an acknowledgement of what had been lost and what had been won. Humanity had entered the galactic community as a young and hopeful species. It had emerged from war as something else entirely. Now it was time to discover what that something else would become.